In January 2014, the body of 18-year-old Heather Malone was found in the living room of a suburban home in Brookhaven, Georgia. An investigation uncovered the disturbing details of her obsessive relationship with high school coach Nathan Ellis. Beginning in the fall of 2013 at Brookhaven High School, a series of events unfolded that would spiral into jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately, a night of devastating violence. Nathan Ellis had always been the kind of man people gravitated toward. At just 28 years old, his charm and natural ability to connect with others made him a perfect fit for his role as the new basketball coach at Brookhaven High School. His players admired him, not just for his skills, but for how he seemed to truly care about their development on and off the court. Nathan wasn't just their coach. He was their mentor, a figure they could look up to. Nathan's personal life seemed just as perfect as his professional one. He had recently married Hannah, his college sweetheart, in a beautiful ceremony on the April 14, 2012. Hannah was a kindergarten teacher, known throughout the town for her gentle demeanor and her love for children. Together, they had just moved into a cozy, 3-bedroom house on the edge of Brookhaven. The house wasn't large, but it was full of possibilities: space for a nursery, a backyard for a swing set, and a future filled with the kind of love and warmth that Nathan and Hannah dreamed of. For Nathan, the transition to married life was both exciting and challenging. Balancing the demands of his new job and his commitment to Hannah required more energy than he had anticipated. Hannah, ever supportive, encouraged him to pour his passion into his coaching, assuring him that they would always find time for each other. They spent weekends decorating their home and talking about their plans for the future. Hannah even started collecting baby names, carefully jotting them down in a small notebook she kept by the bed. Heather Malone, meanwhile, was living a very different life. At 17 years old, she was the star cheerleader of Brookhaven High School. Her stunning looks and outgoing personality made her the center of attention wherever she went. But behind her radiant smile was a girl desperate for love and stability. Heather had grown up in a broken home with parents who were more interested in their own arguments than in raising their daughter. Her father had left when she was 10, and her mother, battling alcoholism, barely managed to keep their small apartment livable. Heather had learned early on how to fend for herself. The instability at home shaped Heather into a master manipulator. She knew how to use her beauty and charm to get what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to push boundaries to escape the chaos of her personal life. Despite her popularity at school, Heather carried a deep sense of insecurity. She longed for someone to see beyond her exterior, someone who would provide her with the love and validation she never received at home. Nathan became that someone. It started innocently enough. It was September 2012, and Nathan had been at Brookhaven High for just a few months. Heather often stayed late after cheerleading practice, lingering near the gym to watch the basketball team. At first, it was just a harmless crush. She admired how confident Nathan was, how he commanded respect from his players while maintaining a sense of approachability. To Heather, he wasn't just a coach. He was the kind of man she imagined could save her from the life she desperately wanted to leave behind. For Nathan, Heather's attention was flattering. He was adjusting to his new role as a husband and a coach, but the pressures of both were starting to weigh on him. The late nights spent reviewing game strategies often meant less time with Hannah, who was busy managing her classroom of energetic 5-year-olds. When Heather began complimenting him, praising his coaching skills, or commenting on his leadership, Nathan felt a sense of validation he hadn't realized he craved. By October 2012, their interactions had become more frequent. Heather found reasons to talk to Nathan after practice, sometimes asking for advice about school or claiming she needed help with her cheer routines. Nathan, caught off guard by her attention, but unwilling to be rude, always obliged. Their conversations were initially lighthearted, but over time they became more personal. Heather spoke about her struggles at home, how she often felt like no one cared about her, how she longed for a better life. Nathan, with his natural tendency to mentor and support, found himself feeling protective of her. One evening in late October, after a particularly grueling practice, Nathan stayed late in his office to finish some paperwork. Heather knocked on the door, claiming she had left her phone in the gym. When she entered, she thanked him for always being so kind to her. Heather spoke about how much she admired him, not just as a coach, but as a person. She told him he was the only adult who seemed to truly care about her. For Nathan, the moment was emotionally complicated. He saw Heather as a troubled young woman looking for guidance, but the intensity of her words made him feel something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The line between teacher and student began to blur, and Nathan, though hesitant, didn't stop it from happening. By November 2012, their meetings had become more frequent. What started as casual conversations in the gym turned into private moments in Nathan's office after hours. Heather, emboldened by Nathan's initial kindness, began to push boundaries. She dressed more provocatively during practices, ensuring she caught his attention. Nathan, battling a growing sense of guilt, tried to rationalize their interactions. He told himself he was simply being a mentor, a source of stability in Heather's chaotic life. But Heather wanted more. She craved Nathan's attention and grew frustrated when he tried to keep their relationship professional. She began testing him, lingering longer after practice, accidentally brushing against him during conversations, and finding excuses to text him outside of school hours. Heather knew how to exploit Nathan's vulnerabilities, and she used every tool at her disposal to pull him closer. By December 2012, their relationship had crossed the line. Late one evening, after a home game, Nathan found himself alone in the gym with Heather. The tension that had been building between them finally erupted. In the quiet of the empty gym, with only the faint hum of the overhead lights, they shared their first intimate moment. Nathan, overwhelmed by a mix of desire and guilt, knew he had made a terrible mistake. But the connection they shared was undeniable, and Heather wasn't about to let him go. Their affair became a carefully guarded secret. They met late at night in Nathan's office or under the bleachers when they were sure no one else was around. Heather was careful to maintain her image at school, but her obsession with Nathan grew stronger with each passing day. For Nathan, the affair became a source of constant inner turmoil. He loved his wife and hated himself for betraying her, but he couldn't seem to extricate himself from Heather's grasp. By January 2013, the cracks in their secret began to show. Heather grew increasingly possessive, often texting Nathan late at night and demanding his attention. She would ask probing questions about his marriage, fishing for signs that he was unhappy with Hannah. Nathan, trying to salvage what remained of his conscience, began to pull away, but Heather wouldn't allow it. For her, the affair wasn't just a fling. It was her lifeline, her escape from a life she despised. Heather's obsession reached a breaking point when she noticed Hannah attending more of Nathan's games. The way he smiled at his wife, the pride he showed when introducing her to his players, drove Heather into a jealous rage. She couldn't stand the thought of Nathan giving Hannah the love and attention she believed should be hers. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change their lives. What began as a reckless indulgence had become a dangerous entanglement, one that neither Nathan nor Heather could control. What would Heather do next? And how far would she go to keep Nathan by her side? By July 2013, life for Nathan and Hannah Ellis seemed picture perfect to the outside world. They were a young, beautiful couple with a promising future. Hannah, who had always been the backbone of their relationship, exuded grace and positivity. Despite Nathan's long hours as a basketball coach, she made it a point to attend every game she could, her growing belly a proud sign of the life they were building together. But underneath the smiles and loving gestures, Nathan carried a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. His affair with Heather had spiraled out of control, morphing from a reckless mistake into a source of constant fear and anxiety. Heather's obsession had become relentless. Her once flirtatious texts were now desperate messages demanding his attention. She would show up unannounced at the gym, waiting for him after practice, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and longing. Heather's world revolved entirely around Nathan. Her obsession consumed her, fueled by the emptiness of her own life. She had no family to turn to, no true friends to confide in. Her grades began to slip, and her attendance at cheerleading practice became erratic. Heather's coach grew concerned, but Heather brushed off the questions with vague excuses. Behind closed doors, however, Heather's jealousy of Hannah had reached a fever pitch. On August the 14th, 2013, everything changed. During a game at Brookhaven High, Hannah made an unexpected appearance. She wore a loose-fitting dress that barely concealed her growing baby bump. Nathan spotted her in the stands and couldn't help the smile that spread across his face. To him, Hannah was a beacon of light in his dark and complicated world. Heather, standing on the sidelines in her cheerleading uniform, saw the exchange and felt a surge of uncontrollable rage. Heather couldn't comprehend how Nathan could still love his wife when she had risked everything for him. She hated the way his face lit up for Hannah, the way his gaze lingered on her, even as he coached the game. That night, when Hannah approached Nathan to congratulate him after the game, Heather stood in the shadows, watching them with a clenched jaw and trembling hands. The announcement of Hannah's pregnancy, made casually to a group of players and their families after the game, was the final blow. Heather left the gym abruptly, slamming the door behind her as she fought back tears. To her, the pregnancy was a betrayal, a permanent symbol of Nathan's love for his wife and the life he was building without her. From that moment on, Heather's thoughts became consumed with one goal: removing Hannah from the picture. Nathan, oblivious to the storm brewing in Heather's mind, decided it was time to end the affair once and for all. On the August 20th, 2013, after a late practice, he called Heather into his office. What he intended to be a final conversation quickly turned into a volatile confrontation. Heather begged, threatened, and cried, alternating between declaring her love for him and warning him about what she could do if he left her. Nathan remained firm, walking away from her sobs echoing in the empty gym. By November 1st, 2013, Heather's obsession had reached dangerous new heights. Nathan had stopped responding to her texts and avoided her as much as possible. Her carefully constructed world of manipulation and control was crumbling, and she was determined to reclaim the power she felt slipping through her fingers. That rainy afternoon, Heather drove to the Ellis household. She knew Nathan wouldn't be home. He was at the school preparing for an upcoming tournament. Heather had no real plan, only the determination to see Hannah face to face. As she pulled into the driveway, her mind raced with possibilities. If she could just talk to Hannah, maybe she could scare her enough to make her leave Nathan. Or perhaps she could find something, anything, that would give her leverage over them. Hannah, ever the gracious hostess, answered the door with a warm smile despite the rain. She didn't know Heather well, but recognized her from the cheerleading team. Heather feigned politeness, claiming she had forgotten her jacket in Nathan's car and needed to ask him something. Hannah, not suspecting anything, invited her inside and offered her a glass of water. Heather accepted, her eyes darting around the house as she stepped into the kitchen. It was then that Heather noticed the cup of tea sitting on the counter. Hannah had been drinking it earlier while tidying up. The idea struck Heather like lightning. She had no real plan, but the opportunity seemed too perfect to pass up. As Hannah turned her back to retrieve the water, Heather slipped a small vial of poison she had hidden in her bag into the tea. Her hands trembled as she poured the liquid, her heart racing at the thought of what she was about to do. Heather didn't stick around long. She thanked Hannah and left, her heart pounding as she walked back to her car. She told herself it was just enough poison to make Hannah sick, to scare her into leaving Nathan. But deep down, she wanted more. She wanted to erase Hannah from Nathan's life entirely. Later that evening, Hannah began to feel unwell. At first, it was just a dull ache in her stomach, but by midnight, the pain had become unbearable. Nathan rushed her to the hospital, panic etched across his face. The doctors worked quickly, but the damage was done. Hannah had suffered a miscarriage, and the baby they had dreamed of was gone. Nathan was devastated, but his grief quickly turned to suspicion. Something about the timing felt off. Heather had been at the house earlier that day, uninvited, unexpected. The thought gnawed at him, but he had no proof. When he confronted Heather the next day, she denied everything, her expression cold and unyielding. She warned him that he hadn't seen what she was truly capable of. Nathan didn't know how to protect his wife from the growing storm, but he knew one thing for certain: Heather wasn't going to let go without a fight. By January 2014, the lives of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather were already in shambles, though the world around them remained oblivious. Heather's obsession had reached its breaking point. Her once charming and flirtatious demeanor had become erratic and unhinged. At her 18 years old, Heather had become consumed by her fixation on Nathan, seeing him not as a person, but as a possession, a life raft in the storm of her broken world. She felt betrayed, not only by Nathan's rejection, but by Hannah's continued presence in his life, a presence that symbolized everything Heather believed she could never have. Nathan, meanwhile, was living in constant fear. He had distanced himself as much as he could from Heather after the poisoning incident, but knew deep down that she was a threat. He hadn't told Hannah the full extent of the affair, trying to shield her from the worst of it, but the guilt weighed heavily on him. Nathan had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He threw himself into his coaching, often taking on extra practices or games to avoid facing the crumbling remains of his personal life. Hannah, still recovering from the loss of their baby, noticed the distance but attributed it to grief. By early January, she had begun to rebuild herself emotionally, leaning on her parents and close friends for support. She spent her days preparing their home for a fresh start, hoping the arrival of spring might bring a sense of renewal. She was determined to repair her marriage, unaware of the true depth of Nathan's betrayal or the danger lurking in the shadows. Heather, however, could not move on. For her, the months following the poisoning had been a blur of rage and despair. She spent hours scrolling through Nathan's social media, analyzing every post and photo for signs of happiness with Hannah. The sight of the couple together fueled her growing hatred. By January 10th, 2014, Heather made a decision. If she couldn't have Nathan, no one could. On the evening of January 15th, 2014, Heather put her plan into action. She knew Nathan would be away coaching an away game, leaving the house empty except for Hannah. Armed with a handgun she had stolen from her stepfather months earlier, Heather drove to the Ellis home. The neighborhood was quiet, the street lights casting long shadows over the suburban lawns. She parked a few houses down and walked the rest of the way, the cold air biting at her skin as she rehearsed what she would say to Hannah. Breaking into the house was easier than Heather had anticipated. The back door had been left unlocked, a mistake Hannah often made in her small, trusting community. Inside, the house was warm and still, a stark contrast to Heather's chaotic mind. She wandered through the living room, her fingers brushing over picture frames on the mantel. Each photo of Nathan and Hannah smiling together only deepened her resolve. Heather didn't have to wait long. At around 8:45 p.m., Hannah returned home, her arms full of groceries. She was startled to find Heather sitting in the living room, but her natural politeness kept her from reacting harshly. Heather's calm exterior quickly dissolved into anger, and she began accusing Hannah of ruining her life. Hannah was confused and scared, but she tried to reason with Heather, keeping her voice steady as she backed toward the kitchen. Heather followed, pulling the gun from her jacket. The sight of the weapon changed everything. Hannah's fear became palpable, but she kept her composure. She knew she needed help, and, thinking quickly, reached for her phone on the counter. Pretending to fumble with it, she managed to dial 911 and whisper her address before Heather realized what she was doing. When Heather heard the faint voice of the dispatcher on the other end of the line, her panic erupted. She grabbed Hannah by the arm and pulled her into the living room, yelling at her to sit down. Hannah complied, her heart racing as she tried to think of a way to escape. The minutes felt like hours as they waited for the inevitable arrival of the police. At 9:03 p.m., The sound of sirens filled the air. Heather's desperation turned to fury. She accused Hannah of calling the police, waving the gun erratically as she paced the room. When the first police car pulled into the driveway, Heather's erratic behavior escalated. She fired a shot, grazing Hannah's shoulder. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Hannah used the chaos to crawl behind a couch, shielding herself as best she could. The police, hearing the gunshot, moved quickly. They shouted commands from outside, trying to negotiate with Heather, but she was beyond reasoning. Heather barricaded herself in the house, firing wildly at the officers. In the chaos, one officer was struck and killed, a 32-year-old father of two, whose life would also be claimed by this tragic night. By 9:20 p.m., the standoff reached its climax. The police stormed the house, their movements swift and decisive. Heather fired at them, her shots wild and panicked. The officers returned fire, and Heather was struck multiple times. She collapsed in the living room, her blood pooling on the hardwood floor, her obsession and rage extinguished in an instant. The events of January 15th, 2014, left the Brookhaven community in shock. The once quiet neighborhood became a crime scene, the flashing lights of police cars illuminating the tragedy that had unfolded. News of the murder spread quickly, and within hours, Nathan's affair with Heather was exposed. The revelation destroyed Nathan's reputation. Parents withdrew their children from his team, demanding his resignation. Though Nathan cooperated fully with the investigation, admitting his role in the events that led to the tragedy, the public viewed him as complicit. By February 2014, Nathan had resigned from his position and disappeared from public life, retreating to an unknown location to escape the scrutiny. Hannah survived her physical injuries but struggled to recover emotionally. By March 2014, she had moved back in with her parents, filing for divorce shortly after. The betrayal and trauma were too much for her to bear, and she could no longer see a future with Nathan. Her once bright outlook on life was dimmed, replaced by the weight of grief and betrayal. Heather's story became a cautionary tale. The media painted her as a troubled young woman, a victim of her circumstances, but also a perpetrator of unimaginable violence. Debates about mental health, accountability, and the ethics of relationships between teachers and students raged on. But for those who knew her, Heather remained a symbol of how unchecked obsession and despair could spiral into tragedy. The Ellis home, once filled with hope and promise, stood empty for months. The neighborhood eventually returned to its routine, but the memory of that night lingered, a chilling reminder of how lives could unravel in the wake of love, betrayal, and obsession. This harrowing chapter of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather's lives would forever serve as a testament to the devastating consequences of secrets and unbridled emotion. The tragic events in Brookhaven left a lasting impact on everyone involved. It was a story of love, betrayal, and the dangerous consequences of unchecked obsession. A once promising life ended, a family was torn apart, and a quiet town was forever changed by the secrets and lies lurking beneath its surface. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories like this. And check out another shocking case where a housewife's secret affair with her cousin's teenage son takes a dark turn. Let us know what you think in the comments below.